Hello.
Hello!
Welcome to WTAF.
We talk about film. I'm Sarah Bodan.
I'm Justine McCloskey, and today we have Rolla Tahir, a filmmaker, a director, an arts worker, and a founder of a film festival. I have her bio here. So Rolla is an independent filmmaker and film weaver based in Toronto. She's lensed short, narrative, and experimental films, which screened across Canada and internationally. Obsessed with durability, longevity, and spontaneity of the analog film medium, Rolla has worked with Super 8, 16mm, and 35mm to explore the analog process and its possibilities. Rolla's first short experimental film, Sarah, was selected to screen at the 43rd Toronto International Film Festival. Rolla is currently in post-production for her first feature film, Jude and the Djinn, funded by Telefilm's Talent to Watch and New Dawn. She's also the co-founder and the artistic director of Toronto Arab Film. Oh my goodness, what a bio!
And she's
I
on our
take you
podcast
everywhere with
2
me
days.
when I'm pitching.
And we present.
But 2 days before your film festival starts. This is wild. I'm so appreciative that you're here. We're so appreciative that you're here.
Did it? It
Of course,
started
I'm-
already.
Exactly.
Oh,
ready
it
to
didn't
go
start.
thick
Oh,
of
I'm
it.
sorry.
You're right in the thick of it, Rolla.
I am. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wow,
How's
just
that?
stopping by. Yeah, how's it going?
It's going really well. It's year 5 of the festival, which we consider a big milestone because sustainability of arts organizations it's a big problem. And yeah, so we're very happy, very grateful. Community showing up, people are giving us good feedback. Yeah, and we're just happy with the way that things are going. It is a lot of work, but it is work worth doing.
Yeah.
Oh my
Beautiful.
goodness. Yeah, I was really happy to. Well, I talked to Kaylee, a mutual friend of ours that we work with at Lyft, and I know a lot of people who are involved and kind of in that sphere, and it's so exciting hearing about every year, what the new things are. I know I kind of interfaced with the festival a few years ago, helping with the producer accelerator, and we want to know a little bit more about that. What is that all about? Because I love the idea of that, and I didn't get to see everything, but I kind of got a little peek into that world. So can you tell us a little bit?
Happy to, of course, and thank you for swooping in and helping us because at a time where we really needed it. And yeah, so the Producer Accelerator, we're not a festival or an organization that just platforms films or filmmakers. We also want to develop and nurture local Arab Canadian talent. And one way we do that, of course, is it's through professional development. So that's one kind of key thing that one pillar of TAFF. And the Producer Accelerator really came about as I realized in order to scale up your work from shorts to features, you really do need a producer. Even if you yourself want to produce, you still need someone in order to help you access the bigger kind of pockets of funding that are available. Every project
Mm-hmm.
needs to have a producer attached. And so having found it difficult to find a producer myself for my first feature film, I realized that this is a need that emerging filmmakers are lacking, and especially in obviously underrepresented communities. And so we started the Producer Accelerator. This is going to be our second year. The first year it was quite small. It was only about 5 hours long, 3 kind of workshops, intimate workshops. But it was very helpful, and so we decided to expand on it. This year it was, a day filled with panels, mentorships, networking, and we hope to continue expanding it by offering more workshops, and definitely helping more producers in those like mentorship and pitching meetings. So yeah, we're very excited about it, and I think that we're already kind of seeing the fruit of our labor come to bear because you kind of keep seeing filmmakers coming again to the festival and you keep seeing them scaling up their work and submitting to other festivals and gaining visibility. And not that we single-handedly take credit for it, but we're very much part of it and it makes us very, very happy.
Yeah,
Yeah, amazing. And
it
we'll
is.
we'll have oh sorry, Justine.
No, go.
I was just gonna say real quick, we will have all the info for TAFF, the Toronto Arab Film Festival, in our show description. But is there anything as far as how people can find that or tune in or pay attention to it By the time this show airs, unfortunately, it will have surpassed. But for next year, for submitting, yeah.
Of course. I mean, an easy way to follow what we do, I would say, like we're most active on Instagram, Toronto Arab Film, but you can also visit our website, arabfilm.ca. And even if you just Google Arab Film Toronto, we're probably the first thing that's going to come up. You can also get to TAFF through me. We open our submissions. I usually say right after TIFF because people know when TIFF is, but if I just say like September, November, they're not going to remember. So we open submissions right after TIFF. We accept films. They don't have to be made by an Arab filmmakers, but they have to have a relationship to Arab world, Arab characters, stories. They have to have a connection.
That's wonderful. And honestly, just seeing how much you're putting back into the community and also still maintaining your practice, that must be, it sounds like a lot to juggle, but every time I've seen you, you've always been the most calm, like wonderful presence, and you're so just full of creative ideas and warmth, and it's I don't know how you do it, man. I don't know how you do it.
So
we are curious.
I have a tagline. A lot of people that ask me this, I always start by saying I don't recommend it. Because it's so much work. It's so much work. And generally speaking, I've been with TAFF for 7 years. I've been in film for probably just over 10 years now. I've been a mother for, 5 years now. So, at some point people burn out. And this is really hard work. But like I said, it's work worth doing. So that's kind of what keeps me going. But at the same time, I just want to say that we do need more support. We need, whether it's like funding or just kind of community showing up as well, and sort of artists supporting each other, because we realize that we can't always just rely on grants 100%. So, we have to think about generating revenue and sponsorship and all of that. But I will say the great thing about doing multiple things like this for me is that it somehow maintains a balance. So like when TAFF ends, I still work on it year round, but then I'll refocus on being a parent, and then after that I'll focus on film weaving, or I'll focus on making another film. So these things go through waves, and for the most part there is a way to maintain a balance, but sometimes you have to be ready for things to come to a head, and it does become a lot.
Yeah. I'm very curious because you talk about being a parent. What is it? This has been a topic of discussion a lot. And I don't know if you're not comfortable talking about this, by all means. But I know for women in film, balancing being a parent, being a mother with creative filmmaking and, gaining higher roles and more funding and accessing bigger opportunities is quite a challenge, and it's almost seems like it's pitted against us in a lot of ways. So how have you found that experience? How have you navigated that yourself? Because obviously you are figuring it out, but what are your thoughts on that? What are your experiences on that?
I mean, as you say, I'm figuring it out. So I'm not at a point where I can sort of holistically reflect on the industry, but I will say that there is not something that is talked a lot about, and therefore it's not understood, the demands on our time as parents. And I say parents because it's both for, mothers and fathers. I attended a panel that was specifically about that. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And a producer, her name was Lauren Grant, was talking about how we always think about the lack of support and care for mothers in the industry, and that is absolutely true. But you also have to think about the fathers that are or the partners that are being asked to take 14 hours out of their day to be on set, and that's just the norm. And so they're not there for their family. And so if I'm going to try to encourage the conversation moving forward in a more holistic way, in the sense that, talk about caregiving in general. So it's not always about caring for your children. You might be caring about of someone else. And it all just goes back to balance and having that understanding. So for example, when I did my feature film, I made sure to include in the budget a line item for childcare. And that's something that a lot of people have been fighting for. And I don't really have an answer as to how to move forward, but I think one of them is recognizing that this is a necessary line item in the budget. And number two is also just for unions to just have, again, like an understanding that a 14-hour workday is not normal. So I made sure, again, to keep my production days, for the most part, to 10 hours or 11 hours. There were a handful of days that had to be 12. But for the most part, like, we went into this and I made sure that everybody on set understood that this is a priority.
Yeah, Justine and I have talked a lot about ethical work hours and just how that makes a difference on the whole team's mental health. And especially for anyone who's a parent, I can only imagine just like the load off that takes. Like, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually getting a little bit more sleep. I'm actually able to spend some quality time with my kids, even if it's just that extra half hour. Like, yeah.
And it's amazing how better the work is as a result of that. When you're well supported and when you sleep,
Yeah.
and when you eat well on set, and hopefully one
Sleep?
day
What do you mean?
When producers get paid, producers and directors get paid in independent film and have health
fair
benefits.
wage.
Wow.
1000%. Yeah. Speaking of, you had sort of written to us talking about like the process and how it informs the work. So sort of speaking of how those like waves of life shape you, like how does that affect how you approach your work?
I think for me, it starts with prioritizing and having an understanding what your priorities are as a human being, as a person, and then moving from that by understanding what opportunities there might be out there for you, but also what projects you want to take on, and being selective, which is hard to do for many people, including myself. Union work is quite lucrative, or commercial work is quite lucrative, but it's not. From the get-go, I understood this is not a route for me because I wanted to have children, and so I couldn't be on set for that many hours, right? So, and that's something that I just figured out on my own, and you make your peace with it. I think as long as you have an understanding of what your priorities are and move forward from there, you can have a semblance of a balance. It's not perfect because, like I said, this kind of work it's not outside of the union specifically. You're independent. You're not really getting paid fair wages. You don't have health benefits. Obviously, we live in a very expensive city with inflation. All of these things I recognize are, maybe they're luxuries that a lot of people can't afford to have. So they go into the union work and the commercial work, and because they need the money and they need to, put a roof on their head. So I understand.
Yeah. And that's something that I've had difficulty with myself is, every time you do some new project, you kind of build on your skills, you take on the next thing, the next big thing, you meet the next goalpost, and then you look and you're like, okay, what is the end goal? Is it working these long days? Is it burning myself out, being caught in a loop? And exactly, like, you need to survive, and there's a clear need for these things, but it's a tough thing to balance, and it's a tough thing to make that call for yourself and say, okay, this is how I'm going to interface with this community. This is how I'm going to practice my own art and my own filmmaking, and it's definitely it's a tough thing. But I hear you on that, and I'm curious about your process. And so, what exactly is your process?
So I think the process depends on the project, but for example, if it's a film project, it can start with an image or a feeling or a mood that I can then sort of unpack and develop. But I can tell you, for example, like the feature film I finished, which I've been working on for close to a decade now, that's a semi-autobiographical personal story. And so it's just when I decided I wanted to write and direct a film, that's the story that just appeared to me. And I felt that I couldn't move past it, so I needed to do that. But moving forward, like, I'm working on that's like a very early development phase on a sort of a historical fantasy, kind of in the vein of The Green Knight, and that has nothing to do with me, kind of on a personal level, but it's going to require a lot of research, which I'm very, very excited about. And then when it comes to, I don't know, anything else, like for example, the film weaving came out of a combination of things. One, I just couldn't, anytime I shot analog film, I couldn't let go of it. I couldn't just scan it or digitize it and just let go of the film strips or the film reels. And then someone at a gallery offered me a show, even though I've never showed at a gallery before. I was just a filmmaker. I wasn't really an artist. But they heard that I was interested in working with textiles, and I just kind of started figuring out, or just honestly, I was waiting for inspiration. Part of it is just waiting for inspiration, like sitting there holding the material, kind of like you're a kid, doing arts and crafts or like a puzzle until things come together. And so that's how I came across the film weaving. And of course, gotta give credit to Richard Kerr, who has the light boxes where he actually weaves the film strips together, which I'm a big fan of. And so sometimes it just comes out of having an opportunity sort of coming your way and having the space and the resources to do something, which is, again, something that is not always afforded to us by virtue of how demanding our lives are and a lack of resources too. But I'm very, very grateful that I happened upon this. I gotta give her credit, Leslie Lokchi Chan, who used to work at Center 3 in Hamilton. She's amazing.
Ooh, yeah. Cool. Well, I love that you're open to pivoting and just kind of moving with where things take you. And I like that playful, like you mentioned, being like a child. I think that's a really fun way of approaching filmmaking and art in general, is just keeping an open mind and trying new things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Speaking of trying new things and getting inspired, you also are sounds like, which I'm getting to know you, but sounds like a really big fan of collaboration and like, working with others, opening your heart. Yeah. What are your thoughts on collaborating?
I mean, it's a big part of why I love film, because even though, I studied film, and auteur theory will have you believe that it's just a singular person behind it all. And, they might be sort of the instigator of the project or whatever. But at the end of the day, it is really a huge collaboration. And what I love about it is that I love being open to other people bringing something to the project that you yourself hadn't thought of, that just kind of elevates it, augments it. And I find that really exciting, because it's, for me, it's a process of discovery. Like, I don't like going into a film or into a project knowing exactly what I'm going to do or how it's going to look in the end, because I love the happy accidents and I love the process of discovery, learning, really.
Ooh. And so I know that you've done co-writing, co-DPing, like these really intimate collaborations where it's really sharing such a big creative portion and carrying such a big creative load together. And I've never co-DP'd anything myself, and I'm so curious to hear about that relationship and how you establish that trust and that bond, and like how you work together that way.
I thought about it a lot. I think close to a year and a half, about whether or not how I wanted to be involved in this film, whether it's just actually DPing the film myself, co-DPing it, or just leaving it to someone else completely. And I talked to a lot of people, and I could not, for the life of me, delegate it to someone else. I big fan of collaboration and delegation. Everybody, I know people have their own expertise that will, do things much better than I, because they have accumulated over the years, and I, for example, haven't accumulated certain skills. But with DPing, because I'm a very visual person, and this is a personal story, I enjoy cinematography. I enjoy the process, like shot listing and visualizing and watching films and finding inspiration and colors and composition. Like, that is just my love language. So I just felt very protective. And even though many people were like, do not do it, it's your first feature, don't do it, I was like, oh, I'm going to do
it. Just you wait.
But I settled on co-DPing, which I think was the right call. And, even though I had interviewed and sort of looked for other DPs to figure out who I wanted to go with, I ended up working with someone who I'd worked with before, and I think that that again was also the right call. I really value relationships, and I value relationships and how sort of how I feel about the person. Um, and it's not always about what they've done before and what their level of expertise is or how long they've been in the industry. I I need to like you. I need to work well with you. I need to trust you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I just at the end of the day, I think Jesse McCracken, who's the co-DP on the film, he had DP'd my short film Déraciné, and I think that he did such a great job. And even though from the get-go it wasn't like black and white, like you'll do this and I'll do that, it was just always conversations, building, the mood board, him watching the references I sent, and then us kind of shot listing together, making suggestions on the fly on set, and just understanding that there's a bigger vision than just mine specifically or his specifically. It needs to come together as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting relationship because exactly like you're saying, you have to find someone that you like, that you trust, that listens and is open, and that also has like a similar or contrasting way of looking at things that can really amp and build and create this beautiful thing. So yeah, I saw that you were working with Jesse on that. That was really exciting. Another coming together again, bringing the family together again. So I know you've kind of talked and alluded to this film. Can you tell us about this feature film and like kind of the steps to getting there? Because I know it's been a long. I remember like years ago you were mentioning this. Yeah, I was still going to school back then, and you were talking about you're like I'm doing some research, which I'm excited to hear about the research for your next one. But I want to hear about how you got to Jude and the Gin. I want to hear about it.
Oh wow, it was a long journey, Justine. It was 10 years because it literally started in 2014 at LIFT, which is where we met, Liaison of Independent Filmmakers of Toronto. Um, they had a program for women filmmakers, kind of an intensive 5 months program that I wanted to apply to. And part of the application was having a synopsis for a film. And so I just, wrote this synopsis, which was surprising to me because at that point I hadn't written anything. And from there, I developed the film kind of just in my free time. I made a few shorts that were more or less inspired by either the themes or the character of the film, again, over the years. And I just figured out the story over time. I did get a professional development grant to workshop the script with a mentor and take screenwriting classes. But really, I think the turning point, the biggest development came during the pandemic. I think it was 2022, probably, maybe earlier, I don't remember. But basically, the project, I submitted it to a couple of incubators here in Toronto, and I got in Women in the Director's Chair, and it was Real World as well, Emerging 20.
Yeah.
And from that, I was able to apply to Telefilm through Real World. And I was then selected. And then the Black Screen Office recommended the project to go to Berlin to participate in the fiction toolbox.
Oh,
Like all that
That's so
happened in the
cool.
span of 2 years. Things kind of just rolled from like it. Yeah, it was kind of like a waterfall effect.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean,
ooh,
and then in 2022, I got the telephone grant. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's mostly just through. A lot of it was through just my own personal time when I had time to develop the script, but I got it to a point where it was then good enough to apply for certain programs and incubators. And that's really the hard part is that we're expected to work on something for so long until
oh yeah.
because the programs or the opportunities that are available right now, they're mostly targeted towards mid-career established, someone who it's expected for you to have already done a lot of legwork. And if you
Right.
hadn't gone to production film school, that takes a long time because you're figuring it out as
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did that feel for you when you were sort of having that pattern of like, okay, now we've got, this is like, then all of a sudden your film's getting like sent to Berlin, and it's like this sort of like, I don't want to say snowball, but it sounds like there was like a nice little rhythm going on there where you're like, okay, my art's meant to happen. Okay. How did that feel for you?
It felt like a snowball. It felt like a snowball.
Yeah. Did it feel like a burden at all? Like, did you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to be responsible for all this now? Or was it more like, heck yeah, let's go?
It was that, but at the time I had a child, and at a certain point I was also pregnant, and so you had to kind of balance these things out, and it sometimes felt like a lot.
So you're birthing a lot at once.
It's literally, but
yeah.
No, honestly, it was ever since film school, it was my dream to go to Berlin, and so when that happened in early 2023, I was just like, whoa, this is amazing. I couldn't believe it. Oh. So
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it just speaks to, I know it can get really frustrating when you're starting out. There's a lot that you don't know. You might not have the support you're expecting, but just keep at it. Keep at it. Do your best. Be a hustler. And I'm not a hustler. I'm an introvert, So if I can do it in 10 years, maybe it'll take you 3,
Yeah. You seem like a hustler to me, Rolla. But not in like the, I know what you mean though. There's a balance. There's a balance.
Well, I'll tell you what, like I wasn't a hustler up until maybe like 2-3 years ago. Let's put it that way.
Right. When the snowball.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for you, what is the biggest, there are many differences that I think are very glaringly obvious, but as far as a director, as far as being a creator and a filmmaker, what are the biggest differences between a short film and a feature film? What were the ones that you knew were coming, and what were the things that surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most, I don't know if it did surprise me, but in retrospect, it shouldn't have. The logistical part of things, especially when it had to do with like paperwork, legal, accounting, like I'm still reeling from that and dealing with it. And when you're making short films, a lot of the time, you're not signing contracts. Just like, hey, you want to do this thing? Let's go,
Yeah.
You're there at this
Let's
time.
do it a weekend. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll sign later. It's fine.
There's so much paperwork. There's so much paperwork to read, to sign. There's a lot of back and forth, especially if you're dealing with, we had to work with ACTRA. And that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Somebody at the get-go recommended that we hire someone specifically to deal with ACTRA, and we should have. We just didn't have the budget for it. It's something I would recommend.
Control Find is your best friend when you're dealing with ACTRA, because that IPA agreement is like literally, if I didn't use Control Find and I'm experimenting with keywords because it's not always what you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's your BFF fun. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the scale. Everything is more, it also depends on the kind of film you're doing. If you're doing a feature indie film that is not bound by certain funding requirements, like telefilm is pretty rigid in terms of their milestones and deliverables and reporting and requirements and all of that. And ACTRA is like 100 times more that. But for example, like we also got New Dawn funding, which is a fund that's a new fund out of Europe that Canada's amazingly part of. They're just like, here's some money, or here's a lot of money. Make the film,
Oh, okay.
So more grants like that, please.
Yes.
Please. Oh man. Yeah, I know. I read that in the bio and I was like, tell us more about that. That's woo.
We always want to hear more about those pockets. Where are they?
There's a lot of them. A lot of, understandably, I guess, a lot of funding and grants, they come with not necessarily creative strings attached, but just strings attached. Like, having to incorporate, understanding the accounting. Like, we didn't get into tax credits and incentives, but like, if we considered it, and then we're just like, no, we don't have the capacity.
Yeah, the milestones, the direct,
yeah. So it's just really the scale from shorts to feature. Like, get ready for it to consume your life. Get ready to be asked a lot of questions if you're directing and producing, actually. to talk to a lot of people. If you're introverted, that can get to be a lot. But I don't know. It somehow I survived it.
And as far as planning the directing as well, did you find that to be a jump in like a bigger hurdle? No, that was
No.
so that stayed the same.
So funny enough, directing and the DPing part of it was more or less consistent. But I think it's because I enjoy it, even though it's more like the work is the same, it's just more of it. But I'm very comfortable doing it. I love it. I love it. So, but for example, when it comes to writing, I love, but it is quite challenging. And when you're writing for a feature, this was a big learning for me. There's a lot of rewrites happening for various reasons. It could be you changed your mind about something, you didn't get the actors you wanted, locations fall through, so many rewrites. And in my mind, when I'm writing shorts, you don't always have to communicate those changes to a lot of people, but when you're making a feature, there are department heads. They need to communicate this stuff to someone. You need to talk to producers and line producers about the budget. And there's a script supervisor who's just like, whoa, changes, what? So
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
I know. It's like, when can I get them?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a big learning for me. It's just the rewriting part of it and having to keep everybody up to date on things, and
Informed.
communication isn't
Yeah.
perhaps my strongest suit. So yeah.
It is a lot of comms, and there's a lot of responsibility, especially just as this is a word I keep using, but leadership on set, keeping things moving, keeping things together, and then also the creative, like it's such a difficult balance for me personally. I have a very hard time going between putting my creative like hat on, so to speak, and then making sure that everyone's feeling good and things are moving and stuff. And so on a feature, I can't even imagine the scale of that for you, and then continuously. For how long did you shoot for?
22 days, but it was 3 days in Cairo, but in total it was like more like 10 days. And then 19 days here in Toronto.
Okay. Whew.
Wow.
That's substantial.
What was it like
Which speaks to
shooting
the
in Cairo?
importance of producers. So thank you, Sarah,
Yep.
for producing.
Well, and actually I was going to say too, like when you were saying, oh, I feel like I wasn't always the best at communicating changes. Honestly, if you're wearing that as many hats as you were, it's just so hard to communicate because you're thinking of so many things at once that like, because I've done that where I've worn many hats and it's like, if someone didn't get informed, it's because my brain's like, there's too many hats on my head.
Yeah.
And that's just like, it's often, like if you have a little bit more budget, you can get that one extra person who can be the person that helps communicate all the biddies. So,
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, so what was it like shooting in Egypt and Cairo?
It was one other thing where people advised me not to. I grew up in Egypt, but I left close to 15 years ago, I guess. And so I don't necessarily have like any established professional relationships in the industry. And so I was more or less going in blind, with the exception that I speak Arabic. But for the most part, because of the budget level, because of how things are in Egypt,
Right. Yep.
for the most part, people said, advised us against it. But we powered through. We found an angel of a human being. His name is Magdi Omar, and he's a Canadian Egyptian filmmaker who happened to be working for a fixer company that works in a few countries in the MENA region.
Oh,
And they typically
perfect.
work with bigger productions like Netflix, HBO, that sort of thing. But, he did us a solid and arranged everything from like hiring crew, renting equipment, securing the permits for locations. And admittedly, our shoot was very like contained, and I was shooting in my family's home, and also I wanted to shoot on the Nile, so it wasn't very demanding. We weren't being, we did attract attention, but we had the permits in the end, so it all worked out, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was a dream come true.
Oh, that must have felt so good to shoot over there.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you mentioned resources earlier and funding and I'm curious because I know you've worked in arts and arts orgs, and you also just being a part of like and founding TAFF. You've interfaced with CFMDC, you've interfaced with LIFT. What kind of organizations do you think helped you most, and where do you still see holes in, especially in Toronto and Canada?
I mean, the holes are primarily, they have to do with actual finances, so grants. And I can talk on and on about that, but maybe it's for a different podcast. But in terms of actual arts organizations, they're generally actually quite helpful. But the problem is they themselves are not, they don't have the support that they need in order. So they don't have a lot of opportunity to support in kind, but they do what they can. And so LIFT has been helpful in the past, and so has CFMDC. But at the same time, I think in order to sustain a film festival at the scale that we're hoping to, especially one that's young and is growing, we need sort of more substantial support. But I think that in terms of building community, like it's very, very important for me to, like you said, interface with these organizations, and because it's beneficial to our community for them to know about LIFT and for them to know about CFMDC, right? So I value those relationships in a very sort of dear way, especially because they've helped me personally a lot as a filmmaker, and not just in terms of like giving you opportunity, but in terms of, sometimes I feel like in my journey as a filmmaker, the best things that have helped me are people being like, you can do this, keep doing this. Here's how you can do this. When I was volunteering on my first film set, I had no idea what I was doing. It was like a grip. I don't know how to put a C-stand together, but then the key grip and the best boy were just the most amazing human beings ever. And they're just like taught me everything, I know. And they weren't like, they were happy about it. They were happy to teach me. So I think that's where these organizations, I think, are like that support, I think, is really important, because you want to give people an opportunity, but you want to develop them creatively as well. You want to give them the freedom to experiment in order to figure out what it is they want to say and how they can't say it. So.
And talking about experimenting, so you've kind of alluded a little bit to what you did. You volunteered as grip. What brought you to directing, to DPing? Like, what was your journey there, and what drew you to film as well?
I always loved film. I mean, I know a lot of people, especially here, have started in film when they were in high school. Like they had opportunity to just like pick up a camera and film with their friends or whatever. And even, earlier, if you're older, you had like a Super 8 or whatever. I just grew up watching films with my dad, and that's where the love of film kind of was cemented. And when I came to Canada to study, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just took a film class elective, and I just realized that people do this for like academically and professionally, and I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And then I just kept pulling at that thread, and I ended up with a specialist in cinema studies. Like I wasn't interested in anything else. Just like took exclusively film classes. Yeah. And people would take minor in something, take electives in something different. I'm just like, no, just film studies, thank you.
You came to Canada not necessarily knowing that you would get into film?
Yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do, cool. But I knew I wanted to come to Canada, so there's that.
Right. Yeah.
And then from there on, I figured I love a lot of things about film, but I really do love the visual aspect of it. And so that took me over to cinematography. And then at that point, I wasn't, I was still starting out, but obviously I wasn't getting opportunities to DP. And at the same time, the opportunities I would get weren't necessarily films I wanted to be involved in for various reasons, and so that's what started me in writing and directing as well. But I still wanted to maintain a relationship with cinematography, and I hope to continue to do that because I do love the process of that.
Well, and thank you for being a woman behind the camera. We need more.
Oh yeah.
That's all I want to
They're
do. I want
always
to be
in
behind the
demand. They're
camera.
always every woman I know, like whenever I go to hire like camera team, it's not that it's like you always want to hire who feels right, but it's like every woman I know is always hired out when you want to go to work with
They're
them.
in demand, which is great.
So,
Yeah. At smoking.apples if you want to contact Rolla for your DP needs. But yeah, so hit her up. But I know you mentioned a few different times in a few different ways film, and I'm curious what it is about film that you love, and why do you keep going back to it? And I mean, it's something that's it's costly. It's getting more and more difficult to do, but it's for me. I adore it, and I couldn't think of a world without it. And I'm curious, like your thoughts on film, and I guess how that interfaces with being a DP as well.
I mean, I'm honestly curious about your thoughts on it as well, Justine, because I think for me, it's a lot of what people will tell you why they choose film. I mean, I think the first thing that people would go to is the look of film, and yes, 100% I agree. There's something organic, unattainable with digital up until a certain point. Unless you're Alexander Payne, for example. But I don't want to say it's an easy way, but it is a tangible way of creating. I'm also a fan with film. I tend to not love films that are hyper realistic. I like a separation. I like feeling that I'm stepping into a world that is not mine. And so I like that separation. I like the look, the distinctive look. But I also like the discipline of working with film. I find it less overwhelming than digital. Digital it's great, and I've worked with it and I will continue to work with it, but it's forever changing, and I just have a hard time keeping up with the technology. Because of the way I like to work, it's much slower by virtue of what my life is like. So maybe it's something about how film doesn't change as much. You can rely on it. It's durable. It's like a trusted friend. It's a loyal friend. It's going to be there for you.
Justine and I touched on this. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Rolla. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please. I want to hear both of your thoughts on this.
Well, no, I'm not the analog gal, but Justine and I touched on this today where we were talking about AI, and Justine was saying, like, that is one thing that AI can't touch because it's tactile. You are physically doing, so good luck.
It's like, unless there's like a robot that can start pressing that button, loading that Bolex, and hand processing with like local bee pollen, like good for you, whoever develops that, like 100%, like wow. But yeah, I agree. There's something about the tactility. For me, I love the fickleness of it, and maybe it's a little bit, is this the right word, masochistic, but when something fails, I like
We're masochists here.
That's kind of the thing. That's been the ongoing theme since film school. It's like we just always were like, I guess we're masochists. But there's something about the possibility that it might not work out. It might not be the way you want it to. It might not, you might process it wrong. You might have done something incorrectly, or something about the film might have not worked out, or whatever the case may be, a loading error in the camera, something about the fickleness and the fleeting aspect of filmmaking, and the fact that it's limited and you can touch it and you can pretty much apart from, I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I'm making my own emulsions. That to me is something I respect that other people have done, and I love that and appreciate that. I don't think that's where my mind goes, but the fact that pretty much from beginning to end you could create a scene, shoot a film, process the film, project and watch the film. You can cut it together with tape and a splicer and then watch it. And there's something so rewarding. And I find the same thing about darkroom photography and film photography is you make something from the beginning and the end, your hand is all over that. It's special.
It's a relationship. And you said two things actually that like that struck me. You said, it's sort of the failure, the possibility of failure, and also that it's limited. And I understand what you're saying, but for me, a lot of the quote unquote failures, I call them happy accidents because there's learning that comes out of that and really wonderful stuff. Like with my first experimental film, I had no idea what I was doing, but the film is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. So, and then the limitation, again, I understand what you're saying, but there's also like you can weave film, like who knew? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of unexplored, untapped potential, I think.
Right,
But
like expand
totally
your mind.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but I appreciate that because you're taking a medium and you're pushing it beyond what you conceive as its limitations. And yeah, as far as I love that you mentioned happy accidents. I love working with what I have, and if something doesn't work out the way I intended, this was a lesson in first year of film school. I went to TMU, and my first production class, I had this professor. I don't know if I could say her name, Herda. She was lovely. I really enjoyed taking her class. We had to shoot on one roll of, what was it, Plus X was available at the time. And I had a loading error in my camera, and the image kind of flickered, and there was some in and out. The image was a little bit off and strange. And I brought it to her, and we screened it, and it looked strange, and I was really upset. And she said, "Nope, that's usable. Don't waste that. You've got a lot. You could see an image on there. It's not perfect. There's like mirrors, and it's kind of going over each other." But she pushed me to really think about how to use that in a creative way and not the original way I intended. And I went with it, and that has stuck with me ever since. You can always make something out of it. If your film turns black, you can scratch it. You could do so many things to it. It doesn't end there. And I love that you mentioned that because it's true, a happy accident. You roll with it, and it forces you to think outside the box, which I think is also what, in my mind, it leads to this idea of film weaving. You're holding in your hand. How do you push that further?
Yeah, no, I love it.
So cool. I want to switch gears a little bit. Rolla, is there anything that you haven't done yet with, whether it's with film, directing, DOP? Are there any roles you'd like to fulfill? Are there any stories you'd like to tell that you're like, ooh, or is there anything that you're like, hang on, I want to do this and I just haven't done it yet?
I'd love to DP a feature film that isn't mine. I love collaborating with directors and writers on stories that are not my own, again, that enter me into a world that is different than mine. Not just like what I love is not just visualizing that world, but also just understanding it. Like that opportunity to get to understand something that is new to me is very, very rewarding. And I'm developing a couple of projects, again, very early stages, but yeah, there came a point when I was writing my feature where I thought this is the only story I have in me. I can't remember where the turn was, but then stories kept flowing. And I'm really excited about the fact that I already know the next 3 films I want to make.
I love that.
It's exciting.
Yeah, just opens up. I have one. It's okay. I know we've got so much amazing stuff going on here, but okay. I am going to ask a question, but you can tell me if this is too deep of a question right now. Being someone who's running an Arabic film festival and being where we are right now in our, I'll say political climate, but you can make this answer as political or non-political as you want. How important is telling Arabic stories to you?
It's very important, but I will say this, it's as important as telling all the other stories that are untold. I have started TAFF. I'm one of the co-founders of TAFF, and we started in 2017 because we were very excited by like a wave of Arab filmmaking that was happening, and we also were just excited about the idea. I mean, this was a political idea back in the day, and we don't use it in the same term, but the idea of pan-Arabism, and there is a wave of pan-Africanism that's happening in the arts and culture, and I wanted to see more of that here between Arab artists and filmmakers. I created TAFF. We created TAFF as a space to gather in a way that is inclusive, in a way that is creative, celebratory, joyful, and this is a learning that I took from Indigenous artists and cultural writers, but like the idea of joy, that is really important, that is restorative, that is resistance. And it was one of those things where I wanted that space as an Arab person in Canada and as a filmmaker. I wanted that space not, again, to be sort of like a silo. It's very much important from the get-go for me to create TAFF and have it integrate within the arts and film sector at large and create collaboration, conversation. So what's happening right now, unfortunately and sadly and tragically, is not new. It's just obviously very recent, but the work that we do was always important, and it's going to continue to be important. And I just hope that we have the capacity to continue it and just sustain it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. The most eloquent possible answer you could have given.
Yeah.
And that's joy, like, oh my gosh. The closest I have been to Egypt is Turkey, but I have many friends from that area and from Egypt itself, and it's like, talk about joy. So, and just like sound and, cultural influence. So, yeah.
Thanks for asking that question.
And I'm curious, this is probably, I don't want to give away too much about your film, Rolla, but I'm a huge Star Trek nerd, and your lead actor, how is it working with...
I don't know. It's a good thing I don't blush.
Oh my goodness.
It's insane. Justine. I don't know, Sarah, do you know that Alexander Siddiq? Are you familiar with his work?
I am not a Star Trek follower, but Justine did tell me. So congrats on booking that actor.
Thank you. It is absolutely bonkers. I am still reeling from it many months after it happened. I didn't believe it until he showed up on set. Like that morning, I was like, yeah, it's not happening. He's amazing. He's a wonderful human being. He's such a pro. He is, he's born to play many different roles, obviously, like being on Star Trek, Cairo Time, Syriana, like he's wonderful. But he's also born to play this role. Like he is the Jinn, I don't think he had to rehearse that much for it because, I don't know, it almost felt innate how much he just kind of embodied the character. I'm still in shock. I'm a big fan of him, obviously.
Oh, I know. I saw that one.
Not as eloquent of an answer, but you can tell I'm very excited.
As Carl would say at Lyft, there's a little squee in that, which I love. So I'm excited. Yeah, I know. When I saw that, because I was doing a little research on you, Rolla, and I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. Because
She fangirled.
I was like, oh my God. I mean, like, we grew up, like, he's been throughout my childhood and my adult years. I've seen him time and time again, and he is phenomenal. So I was so happy to see that he was a part of the story that I'm just so excited. We're excited for this film, Rolla. We're excited to hear more and to see more and for it to come out. And oh my goodness, please keep us in the loop.
I mean, yeah. Definitely. I'm just as excited as you are. We're editing now, and just every time I see scenes cut together, I'm just like, Yeah. Oh, it's magic. It
Like
really is
butter.
magic.
That's a beautiful feeling, especially if it's still magic in the editing room, you know you did something good.
Oh yeah. Well, it's because I'm not editing it. That's why it's magic. If I was, then I'd be tears, streams of tears.
I hear
Oh
you.
my gosh.
I hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great way of ending that. I think we got some segments. We got some segments to go through, and I don't know, where did you want to start, Sarah? Where did you want to?
Oh, you have okay, sorry. Yeah. Me looking at notes. Well, we actually have a question, a listener question from Amber. When does sci-fi cross over into fantasy? And what would you consider the main differences between the two genres? Or could it be is there a balance?
Oh, what a question. That just takes me back to film school. I have to like revisit what I learned. But when does sci-fi turn into fantasy? I think for me fantasy is more ethereal, if that makes sense. I listened to a podcast recently about the difference between about the difference between magic and magic realism, I think. Or what was it? I can't remember. But basically, the accessibility of magic realism versus the hierarchy and the structured, I don't know, the structure of science fiction, for example. I think for me, that is the difference. But yeah, I'm sure I can come up with a more eloquent answer, but I think when I think fantasy, it's kind of more folkloric and more ethereal, less rigid in its structure. I feel like science fiction is bound by a lot of rules. That's kind of what comes to mind right now.
Yeah, I see that. I'm actually getting an image of like, sort of steps with science fiction, or like tiers. I guess it wouldn't really be steps. I'm literally picturing DNA, but there's sort of like this ladder, and then but then with when you say ethereal, it's like there is in fantasy world. It really is this like fluid, energetic, flowy, morphing. It's definitely like a less, like you said, there's less of a tiered element to it.
Yeah, I love the idea of that fluidity, because I guess for me, fantasy, and I love both sci-fi and fantasy. I like huge. My email was Justine LOTR as a kid. That was like my first email address.
As a kid.
Please tell me you still have that email.
I can't. I don't even. At outlook.com. And so there's something, and then also Star Trek, that played such a huge role in my life too, and in my idea of storytelling. But fantasy, you're creating both worlds, and you're creating the rules for both worlds, but one is more bound by the things that I guess in the word itself, in science, there's something a little bit more to the book about that, whereas fantasy, there's an acceptance of the fact that it can change, it can morph, and we can't see that world. I don't know, it's an interesting, it's subtle difference, but there's something to that.
Yeah, I think it's just less institutionalized. Thinking about the different science fiction films versus fantasy. Like fantasy obviously still has rules and is bound by the rules of that world that one creates, but I find that, for example, like a difference between a character in a fantasy versus a science fiction, I feel like a character in a fantasy has more agency to change things, because as opposed to science fiction where the odds are against you. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
Because you do have to live up to an actual, like, whether it's science itself or, or the science within that story. There's like the character has to be responsible, and
And then moving on. We got
hot lunch horror stories.
Ooh. Okay. So this one was submitted yesterday, and I had to read it twice, but this is okay. So this is quote. I'm going to say it exactly. So, and anonymous, of course. Scary set story. An AC got hit by a production U-Haul, and the director had the audacity to see it and say, "Keep rolling." Ooh.
Oh, what? I'm pretty sure that wasn't a union production.
I really hope not.
Well, I hope it hadn't happened at all, but
I
I wonder what happened. I wonder what happened after that. Like, how were things addressed, or if they were addressed? How was the producer or director held accountable?
Informed? Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever seen an accident. Like, I'm gonna knock on wood. I can't say I've ever seen an accident like that on set where it was just so big and it was so public. And to me, this is a clear. This is a definition of what not to do, obviously, but just as far as leadership goes, if that's the tone you're setting, I don't want to be on that set, and I don't want to be near that person.
They shouldn't be allowed. I mean, they should be held accountable. They shouldn't be allowed to work. Like, that is not okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it truly was shocking to see, because I guess the things that I've experienced have been more like, oh, that was a weird thing, or wow, I hope that doesn't happen again. Not in like such a devastating way, but this is all the drama for this one.
I hope the person that was hit is okay. Yeah.
This is the hot lunch horror stories. They do get, I guess they could get really bad. When we were first, Sarah and I were first talking about it, it's like, well, actually, Sarah, the story that you told us was pretty.
Yeah. I broke 2 bones on a set in the same week. So that was not a union set. But I actually, a story I'll be telling on another episode was very much on a well-known union production in the city, like a bigger show. And it was very bad. So it can happen. And I think it's just, a matter of just it's like, are people tired that day? What's going on? Were people like all the different factors? Because if people are not in their best element, they're going to have not the right response, and they're going to forget to be human for a second, especially if they're, talking about overworked and, like the unethical work hours that can happen and all that stuff. So yeah, if you have the right cocktail circumstances, unfortunately people forget how to take care of their teammates. And please always make that number one, no matter if you're on 2 hours of sleep, no matter how much you've been yelled at that day. Please always, if you see someone injured, please make sure they're taken care of.
Yeah.
We have our WTAF SOS, which is our advice segment. So for this episode, we actually don't have some advice written in, but just in general, what piece of advice would you give to a new filmmaker?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's not that hard. I would say, because there's just a lot of things that you learn making feature films, and it's like, where to start, how to narrow it down. But if it's just a general advice for emerging filmmakers, I would say the biggest thing that I will just carry with me moving forward is trusting your instinct. Whether it comes to people, story, or plot, really anything at all. Trust your instinct.
That's awesome. I mean, you trusted your instinct with shooting in your home country, and that sounds like it really paid off beautifully. So,
yeah. And that collaborative effort of taking on those roles and pushing yourself, and also when I find. I love that you still chose to push forward and do what you felt was right. For me, the rebel in me is that anytime someone tells me not to do something, I want to be like, no, let me show you, I can. And
there's definitely that in me as well. But I'm learning that could sometimes mislead me, because I can tend to be a bit of a workaholic. But I'm also just like, I do want to, if somebody says, no, you can't do this, like when they're like, oh no, don't shoot in Egypt, you can't shoot in Egypt. I'm like, I think I can. You can't DP.
Yeah. My gut says this is going to work out. And then look at this fixer came into your life and it all worked out. So.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just, again, when you're working at that scale, even if you are the director, you will have forces externally that might be leading you a certain way. And that's when you really have to trust your instinct. And it's sometimes it's easy because you're like, this is how I want it. Let's do this. But then sometimes it's actually, it makes you doubt yourself, and it's scary to almost like trust yourself. But at the end of the day, it will pay off. Just do your due diligence and introspect, and yeah, it will work out.
That's great advice.
Oh yeah, I wish someone would have told me that back in the day, because I was always waiting for someone else to validate me and to give me the cue. And I even with Sarah, when I first was working with Sarah on my first short film after like a huge hiatus from film school, I mentioned this in the last episode, or the episode we did together, but I kept asking her and her scene partner, Alana, like, what did you think? What do you think you should do in the scene? Whenever they'd have a question, I would always look to them and be like, well, as the characters, how do you think you... And I didn't trust myself. And I was really... That film was a huge learning experience for me to see, like, sometimes you have to make those calls. Sometimes you have to... You're the one holding things together, and you're the one kind of orchestrating the show and making sure that you're keeping everything in mind. And if you're constantly asking everybody else what they think and not trusting yourself and listening to yourself, and of course there's that collaboration, of course there's that keeping the door open, but that's a huge thing that takes a long time to learn. And I don't know, it's just a really nice thing, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's really helpful for everybody.
I hope so.
Yeah. And then our final... Oh, sorry, Justine, go ahead.
Okay, our final segment, prompts from a hat. So we have, so it's basically, we get a bunch of prompts from listeners and from community members and friends and family and collaborators. And, they name a location, an object, a name, a character name, and a genre. So we have 3 of those, and we want you to fill in the 4th blank here. So, Sarah, did you want to do the first one?
Sure. Our location is a hockey rink.
And that was submitted by Matthew. And our second, the object is a kite. And that was submitted by Carly.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Carly.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
And the character name is Lavender. And that was submitted by Shannon. So again, we've got a hockey rink, a kite, location hockey rink, object kite, character name Lavender. What is our genre?
I'm
She's going deep
between, the kite and lavender makes me think magic realism, and then the hockey rink just puts a stake in that.
What if it's a wavy What if...
I'm thinking a thriller, like kind of along the lines of, I mean, I haven't seen this yet, but M. Night Shyamalan's Trapped. Just by hearing the synopsis of that, maybe there's something there, trapped in a hockey rink, forgotten after hours, after her like skating session. Parents aren't able to come back in for whatever reason.
Ooh,
I love that. But back to your magic realism, I'm kind of thinking like, what if the hockey rink actually has sort of like a Harry Potter element, or like, maybe the hockey
Narnia.
net, maybe you go into or like a Narnia moment. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Love it. Okay, I'm adding that to my slate.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Carly.
A Canadiana meets, All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add while we're signing off here?
No, just it's really awesome that you both are doing this podcast. I'm excited to hear more of you and your guests. And yeah, there aren't that many podcasts about specifically, not necessarily film in Canada, but just like the people making films in Canada. So, and I think we're just great stuff happening here. So let's prop it up and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
and we're so grateful again to have you on our show. Like, you're so vibrant. I'm just meeting you, but I mean, Justine told me so many amazing things. So yeah, thank you for sharing your energy with us, your insight. Can't wait to, like have more going on from you.
Yeah.
So
Oh, thank you so much, Rolla. Thank you for being
course,
here. I
my
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. It's just so nice to talk to you and hear a little bit. I know we've had our conversations before while we were doing other creative things and even at work and things like that. But to hear it like this, it was really a treat. And especially because I haven't really spoken with you after you finished and wrapped on you shooting your film. So I'm so excited for you and so grateful. So we have, again, the Toronto Arab Film Festival, June 20th to 30th. The submissions, if you're planning on submitting a film, open after TIFF. The producer accelerator is June 23rd, and there are opening and closing night socials. So Rolla's socials, if you want to follow her, please, please, please follow her. See all the cool things she's doing. The amazing stills that I saw coming out from so many projects and just stunning work, always so beautiful. And so let me get to it. At smoking.apples for Instagram. I could keep going. At Kenya McCann Films, so that's KanyaMakan Films. That's your production page, is that correct?
Yeah, and may I say excellent pronunciation.
Yay! Okay, good. And then smokingapples.ca and kenyamccann.ca as well. So if you're checking out socials, check out website, go on Instagram, follow her right now, please. I implore you, I urge you, you will not regret it. And Sarah, can you do our socials? Because I always mess them up.
today I had to say, Justine, I think we need to write them down. But it's all good because they're kind of different. So our email where you can write in to contribute to our segments is yasmediapodcast@gmail.com. And Yas is JAS, that is as in Justine and Sarah. So JAS mediapodcast@gmail.com. Instagram, we are WTAF Pod. YouTube, we are Yas Media Pod. Facebook, Yas Media Pod. And you can also find us on yasmedia.ca. And from there, you can subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss an episode.
Like us, follow us, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, on Apple, submit, write to us, send us prompts. Do the things. We need prompts.
Write us advice, write to us for our SOS, for our Hot Lunch Horror Stories, our worst direction I've ever given or gotten. Write into us for all those segments, and we will gladly share them anonymously on the show.
Anonymously. Yeah. And if for the advice especially, or not the advice. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this. The horror stories.
It's late.
Oh, yeah. But if you have questions, if you have any stories you want to share, even nice things that happen on set, please, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from our amazing community, and we want to know what's going on, and we want you to be a part of this conversation because this is as much your podcast as it is ours. So
yep.
Okay.
Woo. That's it for today. Thanks again.
It.
Thanks so much for listening to the WTAF We Talk About Film podcast by indie filmmakers for indie filmmakers. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube at Yas Media Pod, and Yas is spelled JAS as in Justine and Sarah. You can also follow us on Instagram at WTAF Pod and on Facebook at Yas Media Pod. We'd love for you to subscribe to our newsletter at yasmedia.ca so you're always in the know.
We'd love to hear from you, so if you feel like submitting to any of our segments, whether it's worst direction I've ever given or gotten, WTAF SOS, What the Fact, Magical Movie Moments, Hot Lunch Horror Stories, or Prompts from a Hat, we would love to hear from you. Send us an email at yasmediapodcast@gmail.com or DM us at WTAF Pod. Please send us some stuff. We want to hear from you. We love you.
Yes.
JAS Media.